Time once again to explore the strange world of the unexplained. And tonight, I want to take you to the north of our region, to an old mill building. Let me describe it. It was originally an old mill house, but over the years it has been altered and extended until it has become what it is today. It's made from traditional stone and is set on the edge of town, raised up from the street level by about 10 feet. The entrance is quite imposing, but behind the facade is a large workroom divided into working areas. Upstairs is a restroom and a small kitchen for the employees. Above that is a small attic room. Anyway, it all began about 8 years ago. At that time, the building was owned by a small businessman who manufactured items of decorative wrought iron. One night at about 9 p.m., when the man was working late, he suddenly detected the unmistakable smell of burning. Fearing that someone had left a gas burner alight, or worse, that there was a problem with one of the oxyacetylene torches, the man immediately went to investigate. He looked all round the workshop area but couldn't find anything. But he still smelt burning, only now it seemed as if it was coming from upstairs. Perhaps someone had left the kitchen stove on, he reasoned, so he climbed the rickety stairs to the restroom. But when he got there, he found nothing. Mystified because he could still smell the burning, he climbed the stairs to the attic room, and here he found the smell the strongest. But still, there was no evidence of any fire. Having made doubly certain that there was nothing alight, he went downstairs again. As he descended, he noticed that the smell got less, and when he finally returned to the work area, the smell was all but undetectable. Mystified, but sure that there was no fire risk, the man returned to the bench where he was working. But as he approached it, he noticed that it was not the same as he had left it, because all his tools had been carefully lined up in a row along the top edge of the bench, and the piece of wrought iron he had been working on was on the floor. Obviously, he thought there was someone in the room playing games with him, so he called out for whoever it was to show themselves, or he would call the police. But there was no reply. He called again, and this time, after a lengthy pause, the man heard a small cry, like a little girl. Well, he couldn't understand it. The building was securely locked, and he'd not seen any evidence of a break-in. So he called a third time, and this time he heard a sound which chilled him to the bone. It was a desperate scream of someone in pain, and the words, "Help me, help me." He rushed back to the apparent source of the cry, which was upstairs. As he turned onto the landing at the top of the stairs, he was met with the overpowering smell of burning again. It was so bad, he began choking from the smoke, except that there was no smoke. In fact, there was no fire. By now, the man was a little frightened. Something was happening that he didn't begin to understand. So he ran downstairs and called the police. When they arrived, he told them what he had experienced, and the police made a thorough search of the premises. But naturally, they found nothing. All thoughts of work had now gone from the man's mind, so when the police left, he locked up and went home. But he had a strange feeling of unease, as if someone was watching him over his shoulder. When he got home, he told his wife what had happened, but she wasn't convinced. She even suggested that he'd had a small tipple which had dulled his brain. So the man eventually put it down to his imagination and went to bed. But all night, he was unable to get warm. He tossed and turned, and when he did eventually manage to fall asleep, he was troubled by a terrible nightmare. He dreamed that he was in an old building, not unlike his factory, which was on fire, and trapped at the top of the building was a young girl of about 10 or 11 who was slowly choking to death on the smoke. He woke up at 6 in the morning, and as he was unable to get back to sleep, he went downstairs to get a cup of tea. But as he entered his kitchen, he was met with a sight which defied any explanation. All the kitchen utensils had been carefully lined up along the back of the work surfaces in descending order of size. And as if that wasn't bad enough, when he went into the lounge, all the ornaments had been lined up in the middle of the floor, again in descending order of size. By now, the man was wide awake and convinced that someone was playing games. As there was only himself and his wife in the house, it had to be her. So he went upstairs to ask her what she was playing at, but she denied any involvement, and he believed her. A little later, he went to his factory, and when he entered the working area, he saw that all the tools had been carefully arranged in neat rows on the benches. Well, this was too much. One of his employees must be playing silly games. So when they'd all turned up for work, he gathered them together and confronted them with the evidence. But as you would expect, nobody would own up to being the culprit. However, one of the ladies did admit that they had all experienced the strange smell of burning in the past, and quite a few of them had found it unbearably cold in the restroom upstairs. One went so far as to say that she and her friend had actually seen a ghost in the attic room when they'd been up there to get something. When the man asked her to describe it, she said that it was like a young girl dressed in a long ankle-length smock-type dress with a sort of apron over it. She hadn't said anything for fear of being laughed at. The man was now slowly being convinced that perhaps there was something here which couldn't be explained by normal means. So, being open-minded, he called in a medium to see if there was indeed a ghost or whatever in the building. And the medium asked me to accompany her, as we'd often worked together before. A few nights later, the medium and I settled down to a long night in the building, accompanied by the owner. At about 9 o'clock, we all suddenly smelt the unmistakable odor of burning. At almost the same time, the medium suddenly said that she could sense a feeling of intense heat, and I began to cough as if I'd inhaled smoke. We followed the medium towards the source of the strange phenomena, which was up the stairs. All the while, I was suffering from a shortage of breath, but as I knew this was not real in the natural sense of the word, I wasn't concerned, only uncomfortable. The medium went immediately to the attic room and declared that this was the source of the problem. She said that she detected the frightened spirit of a young girl. She was dying, trapped and being burnt to death. It got almost too much for her, but she said that she could give us the name of the girl and what was happening. And then suddenly, we all heard the clear voice of a youngster crying, "Help me, help me." The medium asked who was calling, and we again all clearly heard the name, Eleanor. When she then asked what was wrong, once again, we all heard a tiny voice say that she was trapped and very frightened. We went downstairs again, and as we did so, the smell seemed to recede. When we got back to the work area, there on the floor were all the tools carefully lined up against the wall. To cut a long story short, I conducted some research on the basis of what both the medium and I had heard and felt that night. And I found out that in the latter part of the last century, the building had been owned by a clothing manufacturer. And one night, it had burned out. Trapped inside was a young girl, one of the employees whose job it was to clean up. She'd been burned to death after being caught by the fire at the top of the building in what is now the attic room. She was popular at the works because of a habit of tidying the workbenches after the men and women had gone home. And apparently, so that they could be easily found when work resumed the next day, she always lined all the tools up in a neat row on the work surfaces. The girl's name was Eleanor.